Okay. And I'm going to bring up the agenda. Okay. Well, it's for me. I don't think I need to share that on the screen just yet. I think what I will share on the screen though is the four-way test. So let me do that. Okay, well, actually, I'll just hold that there. So the first order of business is to welcome our guests. So we do have one guest tonight. I was expecting two, but we're very pleased to welcome Ardina. And she saw our message on Facebook. So thank you for joining us tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. Donna is going to do the land acknowledgement for us.
Wonderful. Thanks, Doreen. We at Rotary acknowledge and appreciate that the land on which we gather is the converging traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx, the Secwepemc, the Sinixt, the Ktunaxa peoples, as well as the Métis, whose footsteps have also marked these lands.
Thank you, Donna. And now it's time for Timoka to lead us in the four-way test.
The four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it
the truth?
Second,
Is
is
it fair
it
to
fair
all?
to all concerned? Third, will it
build
build
goodwill
goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Thank you, Timoka. Okay. And thought for the day, I'm going to go ahead and offer that. So this is a quote from Helen Keller. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. And then Susie is going to share the joke of the day.
Well, I actually have two jokes tonight. The first one is just to get everybody warmed up for the main line. So it's in honor of all those down in Mexico and New Mexico, Susie, Mark, and Doreen, sorry. So what is a Mexican dish food or a Mexican food you should avoid to stay warm this winter? The burrito.
A Mexican food that we should avoid to do what?
To stay warm. To avoid getting cold this winter.
I'll let somebody else answer.
The burrito.
Oh, I thought you were going to say chili.
So the main joke, a bear walks into a bar and says, give me a gin and tonic. Why the big pause? Asked the bartender. The bear shrugs. I'm not sure. I was born with them.
Well, that's pretty good. Okay, well, Sean has joined us, and I thought that Gladys joined us too, but I don't see her now. So, maybe she'll try to join us again, or maybe when we were telling jokes, she thought that she had the wrong meeting or something.
She's back, Doreen.
She's there.
Is she back?
Yeah.
Okay, welcome, Gladys. I didn't see you on my screen. There you are. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Okay. All right. I'm going to check my agenda. And next, it's introducing our speaker, Jeff Glenn. So Jeff is known to many in our Rotary Club because we're very blessed to have him as a member. I'm going to share just a few things from his very long and impressive bio. So Jeff has recently returned from Ukraine, where he's been instrumental in administering the proceeds of our district disaster recovery grant, providing relief to displaced persons in Ukraine fleeing the violence of war. And Jeff lives and works in Spokane, Washington as an adjunct professor of Spokane Falls Community College in the Department of Business Management. He is a member of the Christina Lake Rotary Club. So 4 years ago, a little more than that, Jeff completed more than 2 years of service as a Peace Corps community and economic development volunteer deployed to Dubno, a small city in Western Ukraine. And during his Peace Corps service, he worked with the Regional Historic Reserve on projects related to strategic planning and organizational management and development, and helped to find funding and support for a local non-governmental organization that assists children with disabilities. Additionally, he taught classes in language arts methodology at the local pedagogical college. And I hope I said that word right. So Jeff he has many other professional accomplishments. He's also the father of 5 adult children. He has 1 granddaughter and 1 grandson, with another grandchild due any day now, unless that child has been born already.
I 2 do, and 1 was born. So I now have 3 grandchildren and 1 on the way. So
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, we're so eager to hear about your experiences in Ukraine, and I'm going to go ahead and give you the next 35 to 40 minutes. So please share.
Great. So a couple things. One is I appreciate the introduction, but I said this at the assembly on Saturday. I don't know that there's anything that could have prepared me for the experience that I've been having. I could have as many degrees as you could stack up in a lifetime, and to be honest with them, none of them is really applicable. So I'm going to kind of talk about how I ended up where I am, give you an overview. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not going to linger on a lot of it, the history and stuff. I'm just going to touch base because I think it has some pertinence for what's happening currently in the news and media, and to make sure that people are kind of up to speed. I will ask, is anybody on the phone or on the call, Zoom, whatever we want to call it, a descendant, Ukrainian or Russian descendant? Do you have any background? Okay. Does anybody speak Ukrainian or Russian? I'm not seeing everybody, but maybe I'll take a quick look.
I don't think anybody acknowledged that they do.
Okay. I mentioned that.
Oh, wait a minute, Chrissy, you just unmuted. Are you of Ukrainian or Russian descent?
Yeah, I am actually.
Okay. Do you speak any of the language? Or are you first or second generation?
I just remember all the bad words, but no.
So strangely enough, that is a very common response. And I won't use any, but the reason I ask that is, strangely enough, there are quite a few people who actually have Ukrainian or Russian descendancy, and that term can be interchangeable in some contexts, because many people who entered the United States 2 or 3 generations ago came here as Soviet citizens, and you weren't allowed to identify outside of that. So you may have said when you got into the country, you're Russian, but in reality, you actually came from the territory of Ukraine or Georgia or someplace else that was part of the Soviet Republic. So anyway.
Oh, Jeff,
Yes.
Paula just shared in the chat that her husband's family descended from outside Odessa.
Oh, okay, great.
And if I can just add, Jeff, that's exactly the situation my husband's family was in. They were actually Germans from Russia, but they were in the Ukraine for 100 years. And then when they came through, they had to put Russian on there.
Yeah.
Which they were very embarrassed about, by the way. They did.
Yeah, no, strangely enough, my kids were told that they were Russian by their great grandmother. And then after her demise, we found out she was a native of Kyiv, and her whole family, that whole side of the family, had been Ukrainian in origin. But, again, depends on the era and the time. My wife was born in the same city her son is. Her passport is Soviet. Her son's passport or birth certificate is Ukrainian. So just something to kind of keep in mind. So I'm going to go ahead.
And Donna added that her husband too, with a name like mine, which is Wilczynski. Oh,
right. Yeah. And it's amazing. I mean, when you understand the history, I've been reading a book called The Gates of Europe. I'd recommend that. It's on my bibliography, and I'll share my slide presentation with everybody afterwards, so you don't have to worry about writing stuff down. It also has some good resources if you want to keep up on some of the current stuff going on in Ukraine, what I consider to be valuable in terms of logistics and information. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through this, and then feel free, unlike the assembly where we have a big room, we're a more intimate group. And if there's something that you want to kind of pull out, just feel free. I'm pretty much used to lecturing in class. You know, strangely enough, a lot of people aren't familiar. They have a general idea about Ukraine. I just thought I'd show you this and then point out a couple little places, particularly where I happen to be. Ukraine's about the size of Texas, give or take, just to kind of put it into perspective. These, you'll see, and this is kind of harder to see, there's some blue dots, but you'll see Kyiv is in the center. So we kind of just talk about east and west through the division line. Chernihiv is up here near Chernobyl. So when I was originally came into the country, I was stationed in Chernihiv for 3 months. And then over here in this little teeny dot by Lutsk and Rivne and Lviv is Dubno. So currently, even though my bio says I live and work in Spokane, I don't. I live in Ukraine. I'm back in the United States just so long as to be here for the support of my daughter and my son with their first baby. Mila, my wife, who's Ukrainian, my stepson, who's Ukrainian, all my friends who are Ukrainian, and mom are in this area, mainly in Western Ukraine, though I do have quite a few people who were residing in Kyiv and have since come west in light of. So how I ended up kind of in Ukraine is I work for the city of Spokane. So anybody who's familiar with Spokane, Washington, I actually ended my career as a superintendent of the county district solid waste system. So I was responsible for air, earth, and water and everything that had to do with garbage, not wastewater. Ran 5 facilities, a couple hundred, give or take, employees, liaison, did a lot of federal work, a lot of environmental work. Mainly, I ended my career doing a lot of what I consider to be very forward-thinking environmental policy work with the EPA and Department of Ecology, and was very satisfied that I not only got a chance to put a roof over my kid's head, but also got a chance to do work that I consider to be environmentally proactive. Of course, my last daughter eventually graduated from high school and was on her way to Western University, and I was going to be an empty nester and had been divorced for some time. And so I decided, well, maybe a PhD would be a good idea, finish my degree, you know, see what had next. So I went to the Evans School open house night over in WSU. It's a great school, and listened for a couple hours about what the next 5 years would look like. And during that meeting, somebody mentioned the Peace Corps as part of your part of the dissertation, as part of the study. And the Peace Corps sounded far more fascinating to me than 5 more years or 6 more years of school. I've gone back to school every decade of my life. And so I started looking at the Peace Corps. I put in my application, and there are some limitations if you're an older person about where you can go. I originally wanted to go to Mongolia, but Mongolia was not within 150 miles, or at least the place that they would put me within 150 miles of a hospital, which if you're post 50, you have to be near a hospital. So anyway, I made my application, went through all of the kind of the hoops, and I was actually at a summer retreat for Tai Chi, and I'd taken a 10-day vow of silence, and got this message. I checked my messages, but didn't respond once a day, that said my interview was going to take place. And it just so happened that my interview took place about an hour after my vow of silence ended. So it was some kind of serendipity in there. While I was on the interview, they mentioned whether or not Ukraine was a viable place for me to go. And my attitude is, wherever I need to serve is where you can send me, even if I had some preferences. I had coincidentally had a good friend of mine had been in the Peace Corps in Ukraine right prior to Euromaidan. And for those of you who don't know, there have been a couple revolutions The government in Ukraine post democratization was started to become Russian leaning. There was a lot of corruption. I won't go lengthy into that, but some students went to demonstrate against the current government and against a fair and free democratic process. And it got violent with the security forces. People ended up getting shot. And within a couple weeks, 1 million people have basically entered, and it became a massive kind of revolution. Lukashenko, who is the current president, ended up flying out on some helicopters with a ton of gold in another helicopter for parts unknown, and they had another set of elections and basically elected Poroshenko, who's part of a famous chocolate family, Russian chocolates. Anyway, so I had an understanding about what had happened in Ukraine kind of prior to my service, and coincidentally, the service that I was going to be part of was the first returning Peace Corps service after Euromaidan. So anyway, I ended up being accepted and drafted. Right before I left, I decided to walk the Camino de Santiago. I did it in winter because it was the only gap and if anybody ever gets a chance to walk the Camino, I'd really encourage it. It's an amazing experience. I wouldn't encourage you to do it in winter. I was very aggressive. It was one of the most profound experiences of my life, which I'd love to lecture on at some other time, but leave it to say, I walked through 3 blizzards, thought I was going to die a couple times, and I did 500 miles in 24 days. So you can figure out the logistics on that. But it was a monumental experience right before I got back to the United States and got on a plane, went to the Peace Corps, went to Chernihiv, was within about 80 kilometers of Chernobyl. Had a chance to kind of get sunk right into Ukrainian culture. Chernihiv is a fairly large, about 300,000 population city, has some creature comforts, but it also has, there's a very distinct feel in Chernihiv about the kind of the movement away from into the Soviet Union. So architecture, there's a long history of architectural design there that you can see over centuries. It's also took a huge hit when Chernobyl went off. Most of the men who lived in Chernihiv actually died and had had a lot of health problems as a result of that. Anyway, so I finished my Peace Corps service. At the end of that, I came back to the United States and kept in touch with one person who, quite a few people, my best buddy there and a whole bunch of other Peace Corps volunteers. But during the last year of my service, I had met Mila. She and I were kind of not really connected in our social groups, but I kept in contact with her. She moved to Poland. I went and met her, fell in love, and we ended up marrying a year later. And we've been very happily married, even given the current situations ever since 2019. Anyway, when the war broke out, we actually were first to hear about it. Most of her family were asleep. We were basically watching the news 24/7, obviously with the buildup of troops. So anyway, Mila was actually texting her son and all of our friends and relatives like, hey, the troops have moved across the border, wars began. And it wasn't that the government in Ukraine didn't want to be forthcoming. It was that they also didn't want to create a mass exodus, not knowing what was going to happen in terms of the military. So if the military was invading into the West and you start shoving people into the West from the East, it would have become horrible. It was already hard enough to negotiate. And so right within weeks of the invasion, and it's an invasion, not a conflict, the invasion of Ukraine, people were already heading for the Polish border to cross over. So we were in a unique position. I was teaching online. Mila's an interpreter, and we didn't have any significant ties. In fact, strangely enough, our lease at the apartment we were in ended just a few weeks. So we extended it a few weeks and then got on a plane and went to Poland to basically onboard refugees in Warsaw and anybody in our family that needed assistance. So we wanted to make sure that we were there to help, curb and make as easy the transition as possible. Anyway, and after a few months of being in Warsaw, we realized that the West was fairly settled, at least in the immediate part, and having our family, 20 hours away by bus wasn't a way to really deal with the situation. So we entered Ukraine and have been residing there ever since. And prior to me leaving, I had applied for a permanent residency so that I could come and go over the next 10 years, and was just granted that while I've been abroad. So let's just, I'm going to do a historical overview just so you kind of understand the context of what's going on. So really the reason why Ukraine is such a kind of a monumental logistical place in terms of everything happening in Eastern Europe, it's called the breadbasket of Europe because it's super fertile. It's been a place of trade because of the river systems, the Dnipro and Dnieper, and all the rivers that run basically from the Black Sea and Sea of Azov all the way up to the Baltics. So the Vikings invaded there early on. There are Eurasians, the Turks have been there, so on and so forth, and Mongols. So it's been this kind of central locus of contention because it's offered transportation, trade, fertile livestock grazing because of the steppes. A lot of the horses that were raised there were of high quality, growing food. It did for quite a long time have a lot of forests, so there was wood to be had, and mining and ore. And it has a fairly nice climate. It's more like the Pacific Northwest. It's a little snow, little rain, little sun, but nothing like as you go north into Russia and you experience the higher, more kind of severe climate changes. Over the course of the next 800 to basically 700 years, what happens is you have this contention as nation building happens, and these identities, there's a ton of history in here. I could lecture for hours on it. But basically you have this development of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is one side becomes highly Catholicized. Then you have kind of Russia, you have Ukraine becoming this idea of little Russia. It's very Eastern Orthodox, which also comes out of the Greek, Byzantine kind of theories of Christianity, and then the Roman, Italian ideas of Christianity. So you not only have these land boundaries that are happening in terms of people trying to kind of grab places that have great trade and great resources economically, but also you have this contention that's happening in terms of religious viewpoints and religious actually warfare, right? So by the time you have this upbringing in the Austro-Hungarian, you also have this idea in Lviv, which is on the western side where I showed you near. You start to have these underpinnings of Ukrainian independence. It's kind of the first time that there's writings that are significant about the idea of Ukraine, even though it's been called Ukraine, having its own kind of independent cultural, traditional, historical kind of narrative and what that actually means. As we get into World War I, and this is an entire area that people can lecture on indefinitely, but one of the biggest things is that you start to see movements around nationalism happening in Western Ukraine. And when the idea of nationalism is a little different than it's portrayed today, because it's relatively about democratic ideals too. So it's not just about nation building, it's also about forming kind of a democratic ideal about independence from the suppression that's already happening and has been happening for hundreds of years from Russia and Moscow, and also from suppression of Poland and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. In the 1919 to 1934, you have a couple other things that happen that are really significant. One is you have this idea of the national boundary actually by the end of the 30s. So you can see this green line. That's kind of the map of Ukraine today, at least in some senses. There's a little contention about that. You also have, under Stalinism, you have this one thing that kind of I want to point out, which is, it's called Holodomor, which means hunger and execution. But relatively, Stalin uses food as a weapon. It's been used before, but in this case, 3 million people basically die in Ukraine over 3 sections. So Russian troops come in and they basically take the grain out of Ukraine. They don't leave anything, and you have these mass starvation events. I'm going to spare you the pictures and the gruesome details, but you can imagine what it's like with millions of people dying from starvation. Mila interpreted a letter from a colleague of mine from his grandfather that he hadn't ever been able to get translated. And in one sentence, he says, "I miss the sound of the songbirds." And I had asked, I go, "What does that mean? What is he referring to?" And she said, well, they were eating everything. I mean, they were eating anything that moved at a certain point, to the point of all the birds were gone. So, you know, or they were eating the eggs, so no birds were born the following year. In 45 and 50, we also see this kind of, this odd switch. And this is kind of another thing I want to point out, because it's part of the rhetoric that's being used today, which is that relatively Ukrainians were siding with the Germans who were occupiers who were coming in for 2 reasons. One is, it turned out later on, we found out that they were helping create an underground railroad to smuggle Jews out of Ukraine, but also because they, at the time, had already experienced enough suppression under Stalin that they thought in some way that there was an opportunity to, liberate Ukraine from the kind of the Russian Soviet Republic. So you have this kind of moment in history for about 10 years where there are Ukrainian sympathizers to German Nazism and fascism. But it didn't last long, and technically it breaks down pretty readily. So again, it's an area that you could study indefinitely. By the end of World War II, the Soviet Republic had basically taken over Lithuania, Belarus, right? All of Ukraine had moved into Poland, and Crimea. So, and so it's all established as part of the USSR. In the 1990s, most of us, many of us, maybe on the phone call, remember the collapse of the USSR. Tear down the wall, economic sanctions, and what happens is right now you have Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Lithuania, start to declare independence. Now, a lot of people think, well, that's a great thing. It, led to this great, democratization in Ukraine particularly, but it actually was horrible for most of the citizenry living in Ukraine. They were left with a highly corrupt form of government, and at the same time, without all the resources that they were enjoying from the USSR, if you can say enjoying at all. And there was a collapse in the banking system. The banks just evaporated. All the money that was there evaporated. There was hardly any way to get materials into the country. And as Mila has described it, it was even worse than it was 5 years earlier. Of course, it didn't take long for Ukraine to start to embrace the West and ways of forming economic development and so on. In 2014, we have this kind of thing, which is again the Russian playbook, and again I use Russian is a large term. I'm not trying to isolate people who are Russian in origin. I'm just using it in terms of the ideological framework that we're currently living in. Putinism isn't an adequate term. It doesn't incorporate the fact that there are people who are tacitly supporting Putin. So it's more general, and please don't take that to be a slant on anybody who happens to be Russian or of Russian origin. But in 2014, what basically happens is there's a Russian base in Crimea, and they just basically prop up an election and basically annex it, which they just recently tried to do the same exact thing to. At the same time, you have a whole group of Russian-backed insurgents who then say, we want Donetsk or Donbass area to be Russian, and we want to withdraw ourselves from Ukraine. So this creates this whole framework that has been exploited currently about Crimea being a territory of Russia and Donbass being allowed to become annexed into the Russian Russian Federation. So what happens on 2022 as a pretext for war? Putin recognizes the Ukraine separatist areas as part of an annexed area, or the desire to annex, and he uses that as a pretense to basically do something that isn't related to that, which is invade from the north and try to take Kyiv, right? So again, you know, we're trying to put into context what's happening in terms of the Russian playbook or Putin's playbook militaristically in Ukraine. What we know now is that they thought they'd march into Kyiv. Kyiv would surrender because, you know, basically you have a president who's an ex-comedian and actor, wouldn't know how to fight a military battle or a paper bag, and he'd give up, and then they'd basically install a puppet government like they have in Belarus, right? Which is a whole different subject. What happens over 2024 is that they just target all of these areas, most of which aren't militaristic. So they're targeting these areas that are basically supposedly a military target, but in reality, they're also, there's a ton of civilian casualties. They don't have army deployed and organized around a front at the time. And yet you can see just based on this map that they're are basically, shooting into the dark. The other pretext that he uses is demilitarization of Ukraine, because he claims that it's a NATO country in effect, and also denazification of Ukraine because, basically Ukraine has become the source of all of this fascism. So what happens just recently is after an explosion that takes out the bridge, they order military strikes throughout the entirety of Ukraine. So on October 10th, which isn't that far ago, all of a sudden every day they're just blitzing into areas that are civilian. There are no military targets in Lviv other than maybe staging bases, but they're not targeting there. They're targeting energy infrastructure, gas supplies, water infrastructure. 10 schools were bombed, 2 train stations, a whole bunch of playgrounds just disappeared off the planet, all in retaliation. And as I pointed out, not necessarily to do justice to a military target. They're not winning on a military front. So what do? They start terrorizing, as they have been through this entire period, terrorizing civilian populations and making it impossible for people who are stuck within the country in the West to even live with some certainty. So November 4th, I just pulled this. You can see that, and this is in the list. If you're interested in seeing what's happening, you can actually see day by day by day. They give you the Institute of the Study of War gives you a kind of an overview, synopsis of what's happened. And, Ukraine was undermanned and underarmed in comparison to the second largest superpower in the world. And it has done everything to prove that that was a fallacious lie, and that the strategy that is being played out by Russia is completely ineffectual. And even today, Kherson, there's a major push into Kherson, and it goes on and on and on. This is just a quick synopsis. It looks like what they're trying to do is actually set up a scenario where they can use a dirty bomb and then blame it on Ukraine, which would not only take out civilians and have a military impact, but it would also impact most of the military that's mobilized in their own area. They have no regard for their own soldiers. There's no integrity when it comes to their enemy. It's just basically atrocity and shock and awe and just blitz. There's nothing left of some of the villages. They raid and they pillage. Most of the soldiers have been given allowance to send anything that they can steal from anybody, they can send back to their families. in Russia, and that's documented. It's just a thing. And now Russia's relying on Iran for its weaponry, which says a lot about its ability to even claim to be a superpower. So what are the impacts? And this is kind of where the Rotary has been such an amazing thing. So one of the reasons I reached out to Doreen, because I've only been a Rotarian in fact since March. Though I did, my friend Makola, who I'll talk about to end our presentation, Makola actually founded Rotary in Dubno right after I left my Peace Corps service, and has been after me to be a Rotarian. And it wasn't that I didn't want to, it was for a whole bunch of other reasons. But anyway, you folks, Christina Lake accepted me gladly. I reached out to Doreen because I'd had some contact with her as soon as this started unfolding. And by the way, so I don't forget to say it, Doreen has been a godsend, both for my personal and emotional welfare, as well as helping me negotiate Rotary in terms of its outreach and its willingness to help other people throughout the world. So thank you, Doreen, from the bottom of my heart and from Makola's heart. But that aside, the first thing that, and one of the reasons that made it so immediate for me to reach out to Rotary is Rotary was one of the first agencies and organizations to actually be helping refugees in Poland and Moldova. And I am part of the Return Peace Corps Alliance, and they were posting stuff about, go see Rotary, Rotary's doing this, Rotary's doing that. And these clubs had just mobilized so quickly within a week. And I thought any organization that has that much skill and the ability that is that so highly kind of readied, regardless of the situation, is one that I need to know about and be part of. Anyway, through that, what has happened as a result of this war, and that I keep trying to get people to think about, is as you've created this this militaristic effort on the east side, everything's moved west, right? So you have people abandoning their homes in the middle of the night because they don't even know the Russians are going to turn around and cross a bridge or whatever in the early parts of the war, to people like staging across. So as the warnings about Zaporizhia, the nuclear power plant, you have another whole wave of people. And so a majority of them in the first weeks of the war left. They ran out of the country. So you have millions of people outside of the country now. This is kind of a newer map from September, but you can see 7.8 million people have fled the country. 6.2 million are displaced within the country. And that means that the western side of the Ukraine is suffering a huge amount of the burden and the support and the affection of these people from the east, who have a very different kind of cultural viewpoint, as well as there's not enough infrastructure in the West. So as it's being bombed by Russia, it's having a double impact, because you're already pushing cities to the envelope of their solid waste systems, their water treatment facilities, their electrical generation systems. And now you're just wiping that out ahead of winter. And so, and these folks internally displaced are traumatized from the war, or they tend to not be able to, they don't have access to the same things that you would take for granted if you lived in your city. They don't have access to the same bank accounts. They don't have half of the stuff that they left in their houses. They can't take care of their elderly. So in this culture, as your parents age, they come live with you. And now those parents, they don't have homes to go to. So we have this entire wave of seniors, of people who need rehabilitative treatments, people who are bedridden, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So UNICEF, or the so basically, I'm just going to kind of quickly walk through here and then close. But you have a couple different things that all fall within the framework of the mission of Rotary: food security, which, going back to Stalinism, is being threatened every day by Russia, right? Not only within the framework of Ukraine, but it's being used as a global weapon, right? You have the health of people in terms of their exposure, whether or not they can get clean water, whether or not they have just general adequate supplies, medical supplies. You have protection, just meaning general, like Shelter. Also, do I have protection from, various other factors, because there are still predators. It's horrible to think that there are war profiteers and there are predators happening all over the place, but it's happening all over, right? You have child protection. There are children and young mothers just disappearing when they came over as refugees because they were being preyed upon by horrible people. You have gender-based violence, which is really something that we don't talk about, but that's, that means that you already have degrees of violence in any society. In fact, I'm listening to some stuff about the United States and the level of domestic violence in the United States and putting an end to it. And can you compound that with trauma, when the severity of a situation where people don't have protection, they can't lock themselves away. You have shelter. There's just not enough housing. There's not enough supplies, even though there are supplies coming into Ukraine. So it's not like supply less. It just means they're harder and harder to access. And if the military doesn't win, it's moot. So the first priority is making sure that military has what it needs to sufficiently function. Water, sanitation, and hygiene. This is a area of my past expertise and one that I spent a lot of time on. If you don't have clean water, it doesn't matter if you can't triage somebody in a field if you don't have clean water. If you can't provide sanitation services and hygiene, you can patch them up, but they're not going to live long if they don't have access to some of those things. So one of the things that's kind of happened, I want to share, because you should feel good that you're in Rotary. And if you're not in Rotary and you're visiting us tonight, be in Rotary, because it's an amazing organization. And it's doing amazing things. So this afternoon, I got off the phone with the past president of Lviv International, and they have done millions of dollars worth of materials, ambulances, fire trucks, IFACs, which are first aid kits for the medical workers and frontline and police force and fire and stuff. They've done RO systems for clean water and these things called sky hydrants. They've done kids' toys. And in fact, there's one thing that I completely forgot about. Mila mentioned to me the other day. She goes, remember when we were at that event and we had bought all those toys and we just distributed them? You got kids who are just so traumatized, they don't have anything left. And just having something like a small box of Legos to play with is a reprieve. It's an emotional reprieve from something that is horrific. It's outside the limits of comprehension. Kyiv International, I've been working, so these are things that I've worked on or I've been involved in some ways. Kyiv International has been doing these reverse osmosis filtration systems that's for clean water at a larger scale. And I found out today they've done 19 so far, which is amazing. And they're all over the country, Mykolaiv and places that just don't have access to clean water. The water is so cross-contaminated with sewage that it's undrinkable. Warsaw, the Chopin Poland chapter is providing a trauma clinic with trained therapists that they've had Israeli experts come to talk about child and family trauma in a war zone. And they're working with the university. They're going to make this a permanent facility in Warsaw. And they're going to train up Ukrainian psychologists and they're going to deploy them in country. They've already been doing that. And I've been working with some psychologists in Warsaw or in Kyiv that are actually doing this. The Rotary Club Dubno, who Christina Lake sponsored their grant, they've done shelters, they've done clothing, they've done job training, they've done medical and hygienic supplies, and they're actually operating on not only grants from Rotary, but they're Adnenia and some other Ukrainian sponsor organizations are helping them too. Rotary Club Netherlands, I just heard today, they're willing to buy, I think it's 20 different RO machines. They're just sitting on the money right now. We're just trying to get that off the thing. And they did these triage surgical units that they can put into the field so that they can perform surgery just short of the battlefield. And they're bomb proof on the outside. I mean, that's how far they've gone so that they can actually do surgical procedures and save lives right in the field. Dobrobut, which is Mikola's organization, he's actually establishing a rehabilitative center and they're doing outlying services now. It's all online. So they have a whole network of psychologists doing trauma counseling. particularly for vets, because you have returning vets already who are susceptible to all the things that vets in this country would be susceptible to. The Association for Washington State, they shipped $3-point-something million in the first week. They're doing millions of dollars of medical aid, incubators, all kinds of medical surplus equipment right to the Ministry of Health. Teachers for Ukraine, I mentioned, because they started this initiative. There are tons of refugees who their English skills are substandards for them to get, for them to work in an English-speaking environment. And so they're providing free work, counseling and tutoring, and they're keeping university students and elementary students engaged in their materials. So they're providing supplemental tutoring for those students. And then SIVA is a medical, it's kind of like Doctors Without Borders, and it's out of Syracuse, and they're doing work not for military triage, they're doing civilian triage. So wherever there's been a civilian casualty or a strike, they'll go in with like 6 or 7 doctors, and they'll take care of the population, make sure that they get the medical attention that they need immediately. So you can read this list of organizations, but they basically are all over the world. And this is just a short list. There are tens of hundreds of organizations that I've been in contact with and continuously are trying to work with, either as sponsors or funders or donors or suppliers or just people who keep the good fight, I'm at 1 minute, Doreen. So, and I'm almost there. So if you bear with me 2 more minutes, then I'll wrap up my thing. So here are the new projects I'm working on. And you can see on one hand, it's food, medical and hygiene supplies. Those make sense. Winter supplies, obviously, there's a ton of need for winter supplies. They're in country. So we're really looking for donations. We're looking for grants. We're looking for other things. Same with generators, solar panels. Those things exist in Ukraine. We don't need to ship them over. We can get them, or we can get them in Poland or Moldova. These filtration and purification systems, clean water is just, it's just critical. And these emergency kits for first aid. But the other things I'm trying to get people to start to think about is the fact that there are all these seniors, there are people who are para-abled, I don't like disabled, but para-abled, bedridden, people who they don't have access to the same things that we take for granted. They're not just getting up and walking out the door when people invade. They basically have to be moved and transported. There are people who have stepped up to transport them, but there's still a lot of work we need to do to support their environments. There's just, it's a critical need. Trauma and psychological counseling services. We've seen what ignoring veteran post-traumatic stress disorder did to this country. We don't need to repeat that. We already have expertise built up. We have people who know how to do this effectively. So organizations that help transition vets, people who do prosthesis, people who do critical counseling, those services are going to be paramount, not only now, but as we go forward. Childcare services, there's a huge lack because there are people and parents who want to support themselves. But if you have a family of 5 and you're living in a small environment and your kids are not old enough to take care of each other, you need adequate child care support. You need to have those things in the community. And then community centers, because we're going into the dead of winter and depending on where you are in Ukraine, it's critical. Okay. The last things, and I'll finish. This war doesn't get the kind of exposure that I think it deserves in our media. This war is being fought on so many fronts, and it will change, and it has changed the world that we live in for centuries to come. Russia is not going to stop at Ukraine. It's not going to stop with these tactics. This is its playbook, and it's global. This is a struggle for geopolitical control, and whether or not we're going to allow people to use food and energy as a weapon against civilians, whether or not we hold people accountable to terrorism, whether or not we allow people to use nuclear threats as a way to leverage people and convention. It's being fought ideologically, religiously, environmentally. The environmental cost to Ukraine and to the Black Sea is unprecedented. It's never happened before. There's no way to even calculate its cost. dolphins just washing up on shore because they're being exposed to tons of diesel fuel dumped by the Black Navy and so on. And then this is a war of terror. And I think we play that down in this country, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer, because for all of these things that are happening, it's also a place where we see heroism at a level that I can't express. It's the only thing that keeps me going, is that the reason we should exist as a human species is happening in Ukraine right now. It's being demonstrated. A group of people are having their freedom threatened on every level, and instead of blowing up a nuclear bomb in Moscow, they're fighting on the front. They're fighting, and they have integrity for their enemy. They save lives in the battlefield. And it's not that there aren't horrors committed by both sides, but this is a fight between good and evil. It's that simple. And it's being fought on every level. And I'll leave you with this. I'll let you read this, unless you prefer I read it.
I think everybody can read it. We'll take a moment for people to go ahead and read it.
And this is my final slide. So
Jeff, as people are finishing reading the speech by Zelensky, I do want to let everybody listening tonight know that you received 25,000, well, not you personally, but the Rotary Club of Dubno was entrusted with a $25,000 US dollar grant from the Rotary Foundation for disaster assistance and recovery. And you have applied for another 25,000. And I think it looks pretty good. Is that your understanding that?
Well, yeah, actually, we are applying. There's still quite a bit of funding left in the grant fund. I'm waiting for some final numbers from Macola, but the next grant that we want is for a senior neuropsychology rehabilitation center to provide some critical needs for them. And we're hoping that we can execute that grant very quickly and then finalize a second, or what would be the third grant in the series by December. There are a couple other clubs that have not applied for district grant funding or disaster grant funding that want to collaborate with us. But Littleton, Colorado is one of them. There's a club in Florida. So I'm also trying to coordinate a little bit of that and see if we can't bolster that grant, at least the final grant up, to help with offsets for winter, particularly, because it's going to get harder before it gets easier.
Right. And Achi has, wondering what we can do for fundraising. Is it, if we were to fundraise locally, how would those funds augment what you're doing with your grants and other work?
Well, so right now so just as a quick thing, we finally figured out how to kind of make one of the difficulties early on in this process was getting money from the United States and getting it into Ukraine. The banking systems weren't really prepared for what was going on. So there are a number of smaller. So we just executed a $2,000 grant from the Alliance, which did nothing but actually supply hygienic supplies to bedridden, actually teens to 20-somethings that are being cared for in their home environment and don't have access to their resources. It was very quick, kind of painless. The money was transferred. We did a purchase within a couple weeks. It was distributed. There are adequate supplies to get people through a 6-month period. So we're working on any kind of small thing. So if we're interested in doing something that's directly to like an independent fundraising that's outside of Rotary, There are ways to identify a project. There are thousands of them happening. I know of hundreds easily. If there's somebody who wants to do something specifically like winter stuff, if they want to do helping seniors, if they want to do whatever. So if there's an area of interest, we can find a way to get funds through a private fundraiser or through a Rotary fundraiser or through a relief grant.
Okay. And then just for the benefit of our audience in Canada, our Rotary district includes the United States and Canada. So that's part of the reason we have so many references to the United States, is because we're partnering with the United States. And the Rotary Foundation is based in the United States, though there is a Rotary Foundation Canada that we accept contributions to. Achi, do you want to rephrase your question? Because I don't think I paraphrased it properly.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for answering. I think half of it got in it, but it was mainly kind of suggesting that maybe as the region, our region community could maybe have fundraising boxes like they do for the kids.
Huh.
You go to the supermarket, you out of the lane, you drop like $2.75, whatever adds up. As a main of means, because we do those big events and we collect a lot, but on the daily basis, we are not promoting it in a way that can actually be directed back. And maybe we could even do a matching as the club matches what we can gather up to a certain amount, of course.
Okay.
No, that's a great idea. I've told people, sometimes we think that this amount, a small amount of money is ineffectual, and Ukraine has a fairly depressed economy. So I don't, not to leverage that, but just a small donation over the course of a long period of time is going to serve a huge purpose. You just don't believe, there's no gift that's too small, and there's no effort that will go unappreciated. I mean, really, I can't stress that enough. And so any idea that you have, again, I'll leave my email and everything else, and then I'll send a copy of the presentation to Doreen, and she can share it however they want to through Rotary. But if you have an idea, there's something that you want, or somebody who wants it, like, I am literally open to any conversation with anybody, anywhere. I'll avail myself to any time zone. And I know hundreds of people who do the same. There's just all kinds of stuff happening on the ground. Some amazing, amazing things by people, not only inside Rotary, but outside. So.
Okay, Jeff, before I officially thank you, what I want to do, because I'm sure there are some questions that others have, and we're already a couple of minutes over time, so I want to make a couple of quick announcements, and then I'll give it back to you in case anybody wants to stay on and ask you questions. But I do want to quickly thank you for your wonderful presentation, and especially for the personal sacrifice that you've made to move yourself to a battlefront and to help the people of Ukraine. It's just an incredible humanitarian effort that you're engaged in. And we're so proud of you and your efforts, and so proud to count you among the members of our club. So thank you for that. I want to jump in really quickly and say that our next club meeting is a social on November 23rd at our home, the home of Doreen and Tony Kelsey. And then we have on December 14th, our annual general meeting, and we have to elect our next president-elect at this meeting. Tony will take over as club president on July 1st, 2023. So I need someone to come forward and volunteer to be president on July 21st, 2024. I want to thank our guests for coming tonight, and we invite you to attend either of these upcoming events or any other activity of the club if you'd like to learn more and become acquainted with some of the wonderful people that are members of the Rotary Club of Christina Lake. And lastly, on a sad note, Grace McGregor has tendered her resignation effective December 31st. And we want to thank Grace for being one of the charter members of the club and for her many contributions in service to our club. So back to you, Jeff. In case anybody has any questions, you're not obligated to stay because we're past our adjournment time. Ardina, thank you for joining us. Anybody can stay on and ask you questions.
Feel free. So
Jeff, this might be I don't know if it would be a naive or ignorant question, but we hear different things on the news, and there's all kinds of people that record on social media and TikTok and stuff. What is Ukraine winning? Do you know what I mean? Like, is that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, that's let me make two distinctions about that. One is, one of the things that I am, because I follow quite a few US and Western European news feeds, and I follow the Ukrainian news feed, even though my Ukrainian is very poor. And so there's a huge gap in kind of the way that media portrays what's actually happening in Ukraine from west to east, or from west to Ukraine. We tend to enjoy what I want to say, a palatable news feed, which kind of plays it out like, oh, Russia said this and this happened, and it's kind of like melded into something that's it's not too harsh, and it's also not too informative. It kind of gives you a sense like everything's equal. So more directly to your question, Ukraine is winning, but winning is one of those hard kind of questions to answer, right? Because the cost and the sacrifice of like the entire 1/4 of Texas to because they're not leaving anything behind. They're bombing it to smithereens. They're mining it to the point where it'll take 5 or 6 years to demine half of the area before it's safe. I mean, as we already know in other areas of the world, the level of contamination in air, earth, and water is unprecedented, as I put out. So winning means, in this case, that yes, Ukraine, like the honey badger, is pushing back the enemy back to the lines, and I believe, as most military experts, that it will regain its territorial boundaries, including Crimea. It's figured out a way to make this so costly a war to Russia, and that the human life and the toll is it's losing popularity. The disinformation can't continue forever, so on. So in terms of that, but the cost, I'm not taking issue. I'm not trying to play semantics. I'm just saying. So, but even today, there were huge gains on the battlefield. And in terms of military history, this war will go down as one of the most one-sided military strategies on the planet. It was predicted to be over in 9 days, and we're at almost day 300, and Ukraine, outgunned, outmanned when it started, and underprepared by all measure, has shown that it has something that nobody would have ever credited it with. And all this out of an ex-comedian and actor, whose entire ministry, by the way, was made up of peers, right? And there were, my wife was disgusted that they elected Zelensky. I mean, she had nothing against him personally, but she was like, how could Ukraine, that wants democracy and wants it so bad? And she became a political advocate during the Orange Revolution, which was the revolution before Maidan, about the democratization. It was very politically active and very aware and very engaged civilly. And this is just, it's unreal. And the thing that coming back to the slide about what fronts we're fighting on, the thing that I also have to say is this is where Zelensky and the military apparatus of Ukraine is succeeding on almost every single front. They understand the world stage. They understand geopolitics. They're ahead of every every move Russia makes, they're ahead of it. And they're getting intelligence from the best intelligence facility on the planet. I mean, Israel's feeding them intelligence, the US is feeding them intelligence, Western Europe. I mean, they're getting it, but it's how they're using it to their advantage. And it's just, you know, and so on one end, and I'll be honest with you, I really struggle because on one end, I'm so heartbroken. Having this conversation is very difficult because my heart, my wife is writing 2 missiles flew overhead today. I mean, I on my phone, I'm watching the air alarms go off, you know, the air sirens. It's, you know, the people that I love, my best friend in the whole world is there, who works until 2 o'clock every morning. He works his job. His son was born 2 weeks after the war started in a hospital where dust was falling from the ceilings because there was, you know, planes were flying overhead. And all this is happening. And yet people are doing these things that are just, you just can't help but feel empowered and emboldened by it. You know, it's strange to say that some of the best in humanity I've ever seen in my life is now in the middle of one of the worst atrocities in the planet. And it's bad. If the Ukrainian news feed just feeds you raw data. It's unfiltered. And you have to really be careful because there are things in there that you cannot, just knowing are traumatizing. It's not even just seeing, it's just, if you heard the stories of these people, and it's not op-ed at all. It's just like, here's what happened, here's a video, here's what happened, here's a video. If you want op-ed, you can go and find it in Ukraine, but the Ukranet is just basically a feed of what's happening and where it's happening. And the same with the strategic center. They're just things. So I'm sorry, that's a long answer to a very short question.
That was a fantastic answer. And that's what I meant, I guess, winning is their land, right? I mean, and all the I can't imagine what the rebuilding is going to be like, and the social, etc. fallout. It's mind-boggling, and I just can't even imagine what you've seen and heard and know about. And we in North America, I mean, we sit here and we hear what is fed to us on media outlets. So I thank you for that answer. It was, yeah. I could listen to it all night.
Well, not to, I don't, if you've ever been to Warsaw, Krakow too, one of the things in Warsaw that's fascinating is that when you go into the downtown district, there's huge billboards up that show what it was like after the Germans left. So like show you the block, like a picture of what the block looked like, you know, and it's been what, 80 years. And now it's a full-fledged, you know, I mean, it's a major metropolitan city. It's got huge skyscrapers. It's a center of banking and culture in Poland. It's you know, and it's got Ukrainian flags flying all over it. And if you know anything about the Polish-Ukrainian history with one another, that's rarity too, because there's a lot of contention up until just 2 years ago. And the fact that Poland has been so incredibly open to taking on the Ukrainian refugees and heart of all this other stuff going on is an amazing thing. But you're standing there and you're looking at a picture and there's nothing in that block, and now there's skyscrapers standing there, and it took 80 years. And then you think to yourself, well, you know, Dubai, you know, the Chinese are building cities, 60 skyscrapers. If you've ever been outside of Beijing, an entire city is being landscaped in the course of 3 years. 60 skyscrapers are being built simultaneously. The entire infrastructure of the city is being laid all at once. You know, and so, you know, in one hand, we've lost this major thing, but in another hand, as Ukraine is restored, there's an opportunity to really craft it, to really be thoughtful about its environmental impact, its structure, its longevity, and so you know, I don't want to sound like an unrealistic optimist, but you know, it used to take 80 years to rebuild a city, and now it can happen fairly quickly, and that gives me at least some relief, because Zelensky is another masterful move, is already talking to to the banks and already talking to the European Union about how to rebuild Ukraine. Like, I mean, they're still in the middle of an active war, and they're already talking about restoration. I'm already talking to companies about how they're going to create sanitation systems and landfills to deal with hundreds of millions of tons of city rubble and debris and hazardous waste. And those things are already being thought about. And so, you know, that's hopeful amidst everything else. There are people who know how to do amazing things on this planet. You would think that they would prevail, and hopefully they will. I mean, hopefully that's what we're fighting for, is we prevail, you know? But thank you for the question. You know,
Yeah, I think,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we have time for one more short question, and then we probably should call it a night.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, don't. I like I said, I could lecture on that. It's been hard putting a slideshow together because there's so much stuff.
I can imagine it's hard to consolidate.
Yeah.
Well, let's see if there's any other questions, first of all. Okay, I don't see any, so I'm going to let you make some closing remarks. And again, I want to thank you so much for your presentation and for the work that you're doing. And I think that maybe if our club wants to engage further, we might think about applying for a global grant, and a global grant can help with the rebuilding of Ukraine. You can come back with some ideas for projects if the club was so inclined to want to engage in that way.
Yeah, I already have it on good authority that there's still a desire. I mean, there's already a growing desire for that. Right. I'll close with this. You know, my counterpart, who I mentioned, Makola, he was born. He has some disfigured hands. Was born congenial deformity, and he's never, in the course of my experience of him, ever even mentioned it. Nor has he mentioned the fact that kids on the playground are cruel, and that when you have anything, even the most minor thing, you know, you're subject to ridicule and estrangement and all the things that come with it. And when he was 12, he volunteered for a place called Debrecen, and Debrecen serves bedridden children and veterans who have lost their limbs as a result of the Afghan war. And by the time he was 30, he was the chairman of the board of directors and the president of that organization. And that's when I met him. And he spent 6 years writing an application to Peace Corps to get one volunteer in Dubno, and that had turned out to be me. They jokingly said they were so sick of him applying that they gave me to him just to get rid of him. And this is the reason I mention this. The guy is undying in his loyalty to his community in Ukraine. Like like I wish I could have been that person growing up in the United States. I never was. I take for granted everything that I have here. And until you meet somebody like that who completely gives their heart and soul to making a better place for his friends, his family, his daughter, and then when you come, for you too, it's like you just can't help but be inspired, you know? And I've done service work my whole life, but I've never wanted to do it so badly as I wanted to do it now. And Makola can make $100 change someone's life. I kid you not. The guy's, he's not only committed, but he's magic. And so, you know, all I can say is don't forget about Ukraine. Just remember that as all we're doing here is trying to do our best to make sure that other people have as at least a limited opportunity based on the opportunity that we have. You know, that's all I want for anybody is to have, you know, the benefit of making the world the place that they want and better for other people. And you know, it's a horrible situation, but Makola's there. You know what I mean? So, you know, it's just, that's the kind of people who are doing good work. And the guys in the Rotary, I was on the phone with James, they're undying. They're undying. They just don't know no. Somebody says, oh, you can't get an ambulance, and it's like, watch me, you know? And so none of us, a lot of us aren't in that position, you know. We don't find ourselves in a place in history where we can make that life, that definition of history change. But we are in a position where what we can do is we can network people so that they can have as much of a leg up in making those things happen as possible. And that's all I'm really going around asking people to do. Do whatever you think you can do. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm just saying, you know, and it's not just Ukraine, it's Pakistan, it's Haiti, it's, you know, wherever it is, right? And I know that this group already does that. So help me convince other people to do it more. That's what I ask, you know, because we can all use a better world. And I got plenty. Yeah, I got plenty. So I try to give some away. And McCullough's organization is one of the organizations I'm representing in the US as well, and trying to help him out so that we can move it to an endowment, which would be, you know, optimum, but we'll see. So.
Okay. Well, thank you again so much. I don't have words.
Thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for your service to Rotary, and thank you for listening. That in and of itself is a gift, and I don't take that very lightly. So.
Okay. Thank you. Well, if everybody wants to unmute, you can say good night.
Thanks again, Jeff, for the awareness and the talk. It was awesome. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Papa. Ukrainian, anyway, yeah, so. All right,
Okay.
Thanks again, Doreen.
Thanks,
We'll talk soon, okay?
Okay, great. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.